Hello and welcome to the Story Artist Podcast. And today we will talk about publishing wide. Not just wide in a sense that you imagine, but in a really, really wide sense. And I'm an author who publishes wide, both my fiction and nonfiction. And I feel like publishing wide is a philosophy that is inherent in being an independent author. For me, it's non-negotiable. But whether you're an author who's thinking of publishing wide but has never actually made the step, or probably you are someone who publishes wide already but wants to learn how to improve this, today's the episode for you because I have a really interesting guest who's Mark Leslie Lefebvre. He has published more than 25 books under the name Mark Leslie that include thrillers and fiction, and under his full name he writes books to help authors navigate publishing. He has so much industry experience. He has been president of the Canadian Booksellers Association, board member of BookNet Canada, director of author relations and self-publishing for Rakuten Kobo. He has actually built the Kobo Writing Live platform, and director of business development for Draft to Digital. Also, professional advisor for Sheridan College's Creative Writing and Publishing Honors Program. Wow, and this interview is really a gem. We will talk about why publishing wide is a mindset first and why fundamentals matter. Why it's worth it being a wide author. Mark will also share his number one advice for those wanting to go wide and how to incorporate story into a non-fiction book. And also, the most important long-term strategy for authors. Don't forget to subscribe to the show wherever you're listening on, be it Spotify, iTunes, or maybe even YouTube, to never miss another episode. And let's dive right into the interview.
My name is Mark Leslie Lefebvre. Now, I write most of my fiction under Mark Leslie because nobody can ever spell or pronounce Lefebvre. It's one of those difficult names. But because I've been working in the book industry since the early 90s, and I do a lot of work with authors, as well as have released books to help authors out, I ended up using Lefebvre because people know me in the industry under Mark Lefebvre. So I had to differentiate myself that when you go to Mark Leslie, you're getting the ghost stories and the urban fantasy and thrillers and horror. But when you go to Mark Leslie Lefebvre, you're going to get the business of writing and publishing. So that's a little bit about myself. I've been in the industry since the early 90s. I've worked almost in every kind of bookstore you can imagine, like small independent bookstore, big box, online, digital. I was hired by Kobo in 2011 to come up with a solution for self-publishing. So how can authors get their stuff into Kobo's catalog? And being an author myself, I went, well, I've had to do it the hard way with Kobo. Let me help you build something. And so I spent 6 years there. I came up with Kobo Writing Life, which I'm so proud of, such an amazing platform for authors. And by the time I left Kobo at the end of 2018, what had happened was 1 in every 4 books that was selling on Kobo was coming from Kobo Writing Life. So that's quite right up there with the world's largest publisher. So it was something to be proud of, I think.
We're jumping straight to Mark's upcoming book, Wide for the Win. Strategies to sell globally via multiple platforms and forge your own path to success. It will be out by the end of March, hopefully, and we're starting with Mark's motivation and inspiration behind writing this book.
Ironically, so Wide for the Win is this long, convoluted 4 or 5 year process to get to this book. Part of it has to do with Aaron Wright, but I started. So actually, I think I left Kobo at the end of 2017. I think I got the year wrong. When I left Kobo, I didn't want to stop helping authors. I was doing independent consulting with authors and trying to write a little bit more because I always wanted to have more time for writing. And I started to write a book, and I thought, I'm going to take the 30 years of experience I have in this industry, and I'm going to put together a book called Indie Publishing Insider Secrets. 25 plus years of my experience in the industry. And I started working on this book, and it was just this big, almost like my life journey as an author and a professional, because that's been the industry I've been in since, university. It was when I started as a part-time bookseller. And I was working on a chapter on Kobo that was way too long. And by the time I hit 20,000 words on this one chapter, I went, no, this has got to be its own book. So that was killing it on Kobo. It was a separate book that I kind of pulled out of there. I also did the 7 Ps of publishing success. It was, again, supposed to be a chapter. And I went, oh, it's like 17,000 words. Maybe it's its own book. Similarly, An Author's Guide to Working with Bookstores and Libraries was another chapter that became a much larger book. And so then I was sitting there and looking at what was left for Indie Publishing Insider Secrets. And around the same time, Aaron Wright, who had been planning on writing a book called Wide for the Wind, and I went, oh man, that would have been perfect with Killing It on Kobo, Wide for the Wind. It's alliteration. And in my nonfiction ghost story books like Haunted Hamilton, Spooky Sudbury, I use alliteration a lot, so it's part of my brand. Then I chatted with Aaron and said, hey, since you're not writing the book anymore, do you mind if I use the title, because it's perfect for what I want to do? And so yeah, it took a long time to get there. And then even just in the last 6 months, when I was really doubling down on getting this book out, because it was supposed to be launched for the end of January 2021. I just recently had to push it back. But what I did is I'd started to make it a very tactical based book on here's what you do on this platform, here's what you do on that platform. And I think probably about 30% of the book is still going to be that, because I can't avoid some of those tactics. But what I wanted the book to be, and this is based on my experience with the Wide for the Wind group in Facebook, is really interacting with and engaging with a lot of different authors, way more authors, fortunately, than I've had the chance to kind of hang out with in person over the years. I'm learning what I don't know about what they need to know in a better way. And I'm realizing that there's some things that I just take for granted because I've been in the industry so long, or even for authors who've been digital publishing, they just take for granted that when you mention that someone knows who you're talking about. I'll give you a perfect example. I was sharing a cab from one of the writers' conferences a few years ago with an author who's doing really extremely well. And I mentioned a few huge heavy hitters from our industry. Bella Andre, the first romance author to really crack 6 figures in self-publishing, and Hugh Howey, the first science fiction writer to really crack, make $1 million, et cetera. Now they're both millionaires, but they were like the early heavy hitters. They were like the James Pattersons, the J.K. Rowlings, those kind of superstars. And this was a person who was in the indie author community for just a few years, was making really good coin, doing really, really well, but hadn't even heard of these. And it would be, and I was shocked. And I thought, oh my God, there's, and that's not even a 5-6 year period. Like, it's not ancient history. It's kind of like not recognizing that Charles Dickens was a literary icon, or not recognizing War and Peace as a masterpiece of literature from our history. Even if you haven't read it, you've heard of it, right? And so I thought, there's a lot of things I take for granted because I know so many people and I've gotten to interact with them. But I want to help authors understand where they are in the history of publishing, because sometimes publishers make decisions that seem completely asinine, completely backwards, completely like they have their heads buried in the sand. And the reality is the publishers are actually looking over here, because that's the way that this industry has evolved. And indie authors are looking over here. And it's very much like, in the way that the world is divisive, is it's really difficult for those two groups to understand that the other ones aren't crazy. The other ones are actually just focused on something different, because their perspective, the old parable of the elephant, right? The 3 blind men with the elephant, and one of them's touching the elephant's leg and says, well, no, the elephant is like a tree. And the other one comes to the side of the elephant and says, no, this elephant is like a wall. And then the third one grabs the trunk and says, no, an elephant's like a snake. I mean, it's like, that's the reality. And so my position in the industry has been very hybrid from the beginning. I am traditionally published, I'm self-published, and I fully embrace both of them. And so I've been able to see both sides. And I get frustrated when I see people who only understand traditional publishing mocking or making fun or not understanding self-publishing. And similarly, self-publishing when they don't understand why traditional publishers make those decisions. So what I would try to do, and I want to incorporate this into the book, is try to help them understand the full picture so that they're not missing out on opportunities that may actually exist that they're not even aware of. So that's a convoluted, long way of explaining. I'm trying to incorporate all of that into Wide for the Wind. So I had to go back. I had to throw out about half of my work. And I had to kind of restart and say, no, I need to go back more to the mindset. I need to go more back to the basics. So I need to throw a few things out. And I've kind of not started the whole thing again, but probably I only have about 25% of the original material, and I'm just kind of redoing it.
As I mentioned in the introduction, publishing wide is a mindset. It has to do with philosophy of publishing. It has to do with the way we view ourselves as authors. And I love that Mark is saying that as well. So here are some examples of why mindset is so important when it comes to wide publishing.
I think one of the challenges indie authors face is oftentimes because Amazon is the world's biggest bookstore. Now where you are, Tolino and Amazon, when it comes to ebooks, are probably about 50% of the market, or close to 45 each, and then everyone else, because they're the two behemoth players. So you probably have a more balanced approach coming from where you're coming from, because you know that there's two huge players, not one, and then everyone else. Well, in the rest of the world, the English-speaking world, for US authors specifically, you usually start with Amazon because it's the world's biggest bookstore. And so why not start and learn Amazon first? It makes sense. And then learn everyone else. But I think what happens is people spend so much time and energy learning Amazon and understanding Amazon and thinking Amazon and only thinking Amazon, that even those who call themselves wide authors, even those who want to be wide, are wide in some practice, but not in their actual fundamentals. And it's a weird thing to say. It's like, yeah, you're wide, your books are wide, but your mindset isn't yet wide. And that's a huge thing. I think Aaron Wright has shared this publicly multiple times, the 10 things to do to be wide. And it's little things like not only offering free Kindles or free Amazon gift cards, but actually thinking about the consumer and the platforms they read on. Maybe you can get them an Apple product. Maybe you can get them a Kobo. Maybe it's a Tolino device. If you have readers in Germany, that's the reason when Kobo purchased Tolino, they didn't just remove the Tolino brand and stick Kobo on, because that would have been a foreign threat and an entity. Tolino was a trusted, known, valued experience for readers, and you don't throw something like that away. So understanding and recognizing that people do self-identify with brands. So readers on one platform are usually proud to be readers of that platform. They're proud to be an Apple Books consumer, and all the products they own are Apple. And therefore, when a subtle thing like an Amazon only book gets thrown in their face, they immediately feel left out, even if you also include links to the other places, but you're only talking about Amazon. You've immediately given a consumer, a reader who may be interested in buying your book, you've immediately given them one reason not to care that much. Or, right? I mean, it's kind of like that click, right? The least amount of clicks to get to the buy button. So I think part of the mindset is making sure you're not ostracizing those customers, even if it's a small, subtle way, because we as authors can't afford to let the potential person who could be an ideal reader prevent them from being able to buy our book. If they are our ideal reader, we want them to buy them, because they could become raving fans. They could become the person who sticks with us for the rest of our author career and buys every single book we ever write. And so long-term thinking is another thing, right? Is we tend to think in the 90-day span of the Kindle direct publishing tour of duty, I call it, like the KDP Select tour of duty, and not think beyond that, because oftentimes it's, well, I'll go wide for 3 months and see what happens. and oftentimes, and I can say this having worked at Kobo, is any author who's actually can build a platform on Kobo in less than 9 months is doing really remarkably, because it's a long, slow build. And the same is true on Apple. I was just talking to an author the other day doing like a personal one-on-one consult, and they've been wide for a long, long time. They changed their covers recently, and then they had a BookBub, and then it was like these factors in combination over time, after years, finally now Apple is almost overtaking their Amazon sales. And it was kind of like, it kind of took a month, but it took 2 years to get to that point. And we often don't think long-term enough. I think that's one of the other challenges that we tend to have as authors.
And this is exactly what I mean. Your raving fans, your 1,000 true fans, could be on other platforms than Amazon. Why would you want to risk to lose them? Why would you want to risk to never meet them and never give them the gift of your story? This is why I think publishing wide is so important. But how about the business side of things? How about the why in general? Because publishing wide is not easy. If it were easy, everybody would do it for the other obvious reasons. Why is it still worth it?
I think it's a strategy for being an author in general. And my version of wide is far bigger than KDP Select, exclusive, Kindle Unlimited, versus four other major e-retailers. My version of wide is everywhere you could sell. It's including the different apps that are available if it's right for you and your market and your readers. It's being open to potential traditional publishing deals. It's being open to stop thinking just about you as a writer and books, but think about you as a storyteller. And a book is just one of the ways that your IP can be leveraged or licensed. So considering wide comes back to, Aaron Wright says this brilliantly, bank over rank. And I mean, yes, rank is great and it feeds the ego, and getting 5-star reviews and is lovely, but it doesn't pay the bills. If I want to make a sustainable long-term income as an author, I have to make sure that I have consistent revenue sources. And if I'm dependent on any one, now I've left the corporate world. I still do corporate work with clients, but I do not want to have any single company be in charge of my destiny. I want to be in charge of my own destiny. And so that was what part of the mindset that when I was ready to leave Kobo, even though I love them to death, I wanted to move on and not be dependent on a single company. But the same thing, a lot of the fear is, oh, I'm getting all my Amazon income from Amazon. What if Amazon changes it or goes away? Like that's the fear. It goes beyond just that, because I was self-publishing at a time when Amazon only gave 30%. It wasn't until Apple showed up that they started to give 70%. And we've seen the changes that people can make. I liken it to what if you were exclusive to Blockbuster, if that's a brand that you're familiar with in Europe. But I'm exclusive to Oh wait, there is no Blockbuster, right? Well, there's one location in the US, so you'd be okay there. So I think being open to all of the possibilities and also being open to additional revenue streams, because then if one of them goes away, you're not, oh my God, what am I going to do? If one of them goes away, you go, oh, we lost one. Oh, okay. But that's okay. I've got 40 other sources. I think it was either Kevin J. Anderson or Dean Wesley Smith. We were on a panel together talking about this topic in Vegas. I think it was a couple of years ago. And it was either Dean or Kevin. I can't remember. They're both brilliant and I admire them both. So I kind of confused. And they've been best friends for a long time. So I always think of them in very similar, right? Because they're New York Times bestsellers who've migrated into independent publishing. And it was kind of like the streams that feed the rivers, that feed the lakes, that feed the ocean. And thinking of your income like that, rather than just focusing on the ocean, but thinking about all of those things that build up. And it's cumulative over time. Every decision you make, every publishing decision you make, every place that your IP is available to be licensed or to sell is an additional stream of revenue. And it also comes in at different times, which can be beneficial. I think wide to me is long-term planning for an author, but it's also long-term financial, planning so that you can potentially actually be properly independent. I also like to say, can you truly call yourself an independent author if you're exclusive to a single retailer? I would argue that you're a corporate author, not an independent author.
This is exactly my point. I feel like if I want to be an independent author, I can't be dependent on one single retailer. If I want to be there for the long term, I have to have several streams of income that if one of them breaks down, I don't have to sweat it. But I love that Mark also said that we are not thinking wide enough. So how wide can we actually go?
So again, think about when you think you have an idea for a book. You're brilliant. You're a creator. You've got this heart and energy and passion and soul, and you pour it all into this story that you've told. That book is just one way that you can express and make money off your IP. I did a book this last year, Taking the Short Tack with Maddie Dalrymple, which kind of incorporates my version of, okay, short fiction. What can you do with short fiction? How can you use it for marketing? How could you use it to make more money? How can you split and divide it, right? Because it's a smaller thing that you can tactile. But that's just one thing you can do with it. And I'll give you an example. A traditionally published book that I have with Canada's largest independent publisher. And that was a traditional deal where they gave me an advance and then I get a royalty check every year. And they have distribution. My books have been in Costco. They've been in Walmart. They're in major book chains. Now, it tend to be regional because it's a regional book. And that's important because understanding that doesn't sell so well in ebook because it's a regional book, but because it's about a local city and local ghosts, it's a souvenir. People want a copy of it. They go on a ghost walk and then they want to have something, so they buy a book. They want a signed copy. So that's going to sell better in print. If I was only thinking about that as ebook, I would have missed out on that market. But then this company came along from South Africa, VoiceMap, and they allow you to do virtual walking tours where you can record audio. Now, I've already licensed the world rights to Haunted Hamilton, and they also have the audio rights, even though they've never exploited the audio. But I have all the research that went into the book still. So I can rewrite, using the same research, a new version of the same content in a way that is packaged differently, and actually could potentially help me sell more books, and has helped me sell more books, but I still make 50% of the margin on it. So when you go into Hamilton, Ontario, for example, there's a voice map tour of downtown haunted Hamilton that is me, a half-hour walking tour, guiding you through the city, guided tour through this audio experience. And obviously, if you really, really like that, you may end up going and buying my book. So I've taken that and I've exploited it in different ways. I have also taken some of the research I've done for the nonfiction and turned that into fiction that I've sold. And there's other things, like there's television. I'm actually working with a couple different companies based on the IP that started with Haunted Hamilton. And I'm working with them on other interactive, not books, but associated to storytelling. And so I'm potentially going to find new ways to exploit revenue. When you think about all of the different things that are available to us now for technology, when you have that idea for a book, don't limit it to just book. Now, ebook, easy, less expensive, editor, cover design, easy to do, point and click, push, publish, you're everywhere in the world. You know, that's a starting place, but don't limit yourself to only thinking about that. That's kind of some of the things that I get into in a little bit more detail, trying to explore these. And I think the biggest challenge is in the writing of this book, in the last 6 months, like 5 technologies have emerged in the meantime that I have to now go back and get more research on so I can properly share with authors where they can find more information.
And I really love this idea. We're not just writers, we are storytellers. We can tell stories not just in writing. We can tell those stories in all the media available to us right now. And this is a lot. We can tell it in audio. We can tell it in video. We can tell it interactively, like Mark did with the map. There are so many possibilities open to us. And having this mindset and thinking about how can I take this story and package it differently is so, so important. And also a lot of fun. Now, let's dive deeper into publishing wide. For those who want to go wide, what is the number one advice Mark would give?
I think the first thing to ask yourself is, why do you want to go wide? And properly understand. Are you just going wide because everyone's doing it? Or are you just going wide because someone did it and they did well? What is your personal reason? What do you want? And that also goes back to, what do you want? And it's not just as an author in a career, but every single book. And we'll start with book because that's a limited version of IP, but let's pretend we'll start there at least. Every single book has its own path. There may be books that are better suited to being exclusive to Amazon and Kindle Unlimited. There may be other books that may be exclusively signed over to another digital reading app that offers you some sort of deal and money for exclusivity. That's fine. You have other IPs. You have other things you can sell, right? So being wide is being open to all the possibilities, including where exclusive. Technically, when you sign a deal with a publisher, you're kind of exclusive in a way. So that's kind of exclusivity. It tends to be longer term. So first, understanding that. The second thing is, when you've decided to go wide, the way that a lot of people say is, we'll start with Amazon because Amazon's the biggest retailer, and then learn it, etc. But it's kind of like no different than social media strategy. People say, I have to do social media. What should I do at all? It's kind of like, well, take a look and see, well, what community resonates with you, do you actually have a community that you can engage with and interact with, and maybe focus on that rather than trying to spread yourself too thin? So even though you may publish wide and be everywhere, what I advise you to do is get into as many places as you can, but you may want to take some time, the way you took time to learn Amazon, and focus on each of the retailers. Now, I was just on a session that Apple hosted. This was through Drafted Digital, and it was Apple hosting all about Apple. And I've been publishing to Apple since it was available. I've been working with Apple on, through Drafted Digital. There's things that they shared that are basic things I had no idea about. So it was this, and I was like, oh my God, that investment of 1 hour of time is going to help me so much better understand not just how to publish to Apple, but I learned a lot of insights on what does the consumer who uses Apple to read, what is their experience, and how can I engage with them in a positive way? And so when I think about that, I was like, yeah, I've been publishing wide on Apple, and my Apple sales could always use some improvement. So I'm thinking that I just gained a few pieces of information, obviously stuff that's going to be added in to the book, so I can help other people who weren't able to get into a session like that. But learning from the retailers, learning from the distributors, learning from the other authors who are having success on those platforms. Like, I think, was it Brian Rathbone was one of the authors who's done really, really well on Google Play. And so, I've listened to a lot of his interviews, and I've interviewed him myself. It's like, hey, how'd you do it? What are you doing? What's it like on Google? Because again, I'm a Kobo reader. I read on Kobo. So I understand Kobo really well, and I understand Kindle because every book on the market is about Kindle. so the information's out there, but I don't know Google as well, right? Because they're kind of a latecomer to the game, and they've only really stepped up the game probably in the last year and a half. So I think focusing on each one and giving it the attention, you'll notice that if you've given it the right attention and you understand their readers and what's going on there and how they merchandise, if they merchandise, etc., I think you'll give yourself a lot more opportunity to sell better once you understand the platform.
Learn about the other retailers with the reader in mind. What is his or her experience? How do they approach finding books? And so on. But this is not that easy. 90% of the information out there is about the Amazon Kindle store. It's about the Amazon keywords and algorithms and everything else. And it's so difficult to find information about the other retailers. This is why I'm looking so much forward to Mark's book, by the way. So is there any specific advice Mark can give for some other retailers?
Well, I mean, the keywords are the way that the inmates run the asylum on Amazon, basically. Keywords are an Amazon game. Most of the other retailers, keywords are not as important. However, for example, both for Google and for Apple, the metadata, the description is mined a lot more detailed, in a more detailed fashion, to pull and extract the proper keywords. I am of the mind that more retailers are probably going to get smarter in the future and actually mine the real data, the actual content of the book. I know they can do this because the technology has existed for almost a decade. And there are companies doing amazing scraping of EPUB files, because all an EPUB is HTML. It's a web page just embedded and zipped, basically, for lack of a more complicated way of explaining it. All that data is there like a website. Therefore, if I'm interested in reading books about father-son relationships, I shouldn't have to rely on someone having to game the keywords. I should rely on the content itself. And I think retailers, I would hope retailers would continue to move more in that direction and less in the direction of somebody who has $20,000 to spend on Amazon marketing ads is going to get all the attention, whereas a really, really great book that's been edited, published, and is ideal for a certain reader is not displayed to them. And that's the other frustration that I have with a place like Amazon. You kind of have to pay, and if you want to sell on Amazon. In other places, yeah, you can get BookBubs and things like that, which definitely help. You can be part of promotions, but a lot of it's more based on the content and not on the keywords. So yeah, keywords is a good example, but I think Google and Apple, for example, they're looking at the actual metadata itself rather than an additional field of keywords. So that may be one thing that could be useful, and that could change too. That's one of the other challenges about tactics, is by the time the book gets published, maybe they change the way they do it. Maybe they start scraping the EPUB, or maybe they go look into, because if you've ever looked at what an EPUB is composed of, there's actual tags in the EPUB to put keywords in. So I know, for example, when you create an EPUB through Draft to Digital and you put your keywords there, those keywords get embedded in the EPUB file. Not a lot of retailers are reading it, but maybe one day they will. So if you manage to take the time to put keywords in your EPUB file, that work's been done years ago. So when the retailer turns it on, you've already benefited and you're already ahead of the game. Maybe some have turned it on and we just don't know yet, because very few of them actually share stuff. Like Kobo is one of the few ones that actually tells you things.
So maybe there is no actual gaming of the other platforms like you can do with Amazon in terms of categories and keywords. And I really like that they are looking at the actual data in your book, what your book is about. But we still have to dive deeper into those platforms and learn about them and learn about how readers can discover us on there. Before we finish this interview, I really would like to ask Mark about his nonfiction writing process. You already mentioned that you threw away like 75% of what you've written, which is crazy. But what about, like you said, that we are storytellers? And I feel like sometimes it's hard to incorporate storytelling into nonfiction because you're trying to get information across. So what do you do to avoid this big wall of information, big chunks of information, and so that those things still stick with people?
It's hard. I think because I have a background as a nonfiction ghost storyteller, there's a much tighter connection to story in sharing a true story. Think about, at the end of the day, with your roommates, your partner, or whatever, you're having dinner and you're talking about your day. It's nonfiction. It's true stuff that's happened in your day. It's a story. You're sharing a story, right? You're relaying something that happened in your day as a story. You may also be explaining something, because I work in the book business and my partner works in education. So she says stuff and I go, I don't know what you mean. You used an abbreviation, and I say ISBN and she's like, that's a thing on a book, right? Like it's not in her. So you have to relay information in the story, which is kind of like, not show, don't tell, but it's the same thing where you're relaying so professor, tell us, how did we get to this location? And so there's this subtle art of relaying the information in a way that doesn't put them to sleep because it's dry and boring, but makes it entertaining. And I owe, to much of my credit, there are teachers that I've had who taught subjects that I was not good at: physics and math and science and history. And they made it interesting because they turned it not into a lesson about dates and times or codes and tables I had to memorize, but they made it interesting. They created a story. So even in the relaying of, this is how Google operates, there's a way to relay story that can actually help the reader feel like they're on the journey with you. In a lot of cases, so for example, in several of my books, like The Author's Guide to Working with Bookstores and Libraries, I use a lot of personal examples. Or in the 7 Ps of Publishing Success, I used examples from some of the thousands of authors I've worked with over the years. And I find that relaying an example of how author day, and that's the other thing about Wide for the Win, is I'm trying to incorporate as many examples from as many different authors as possible. And obviously, because I want to give credit where credit is due, it's like, well, Diana Wink, this is how she did this, right? She, so for example, she lives in Germany and she understands Tolino, and this is what she understands about it. So when she was trying to market there, this is how she approached it, which was different than the way you would approach marketing on Kindle, even in the same country, or whatever. Or Patty Jensen, who's in Australia and understands the market in Australia better than any of us do because she lives there and is very successful. She understands marketing in a different way. So trying to incorporate examples and stories about how different people use it is one of the other things. I'm trying to go back and say, all right, I've got the details, I've got the dry. How do I incorporate what real people are doing so that I can make it more dynamic? Because you may read it and go, well, I don't connect with Mark and his story, But I connect when he shared the story about Aaron or Patty or Diana or these other people, right? Like that's part of the storytelling, because there's going to be characters in fiction people just don't like. Oh my God, I can't stand the scene with so-and-so. So they don't like these scenes because they don't like the character point of view or whatever. I mean, it's going to happen in nonfiction. So that's one of the other things that I had to go back and kind of and rework and tweak, that I think is going to make it a little bit of a better experience for readers, I hope.
Mm. And is there any specific way you structure your writing process in when it comes to nonfiction?
I do a lot of lists and bullets. And I probably do a lot more outlining than I would for fiction. So I have spreadsheets, I have notepads with like bulleted lists, and then I also let myself be creative. So for example, I was working on a chapter this morning. I get up early in the morning, 5:30 in the morning, and work for 2-3 hours in the morning before the work day starts, because I find I can get uninterrupted stuff done. But this morning I was working on a chapter, and I think it was on using distributors versus going direct. And I broke it down into 7 things to consider, because it's pretty complicated for the decisions you make. Here are the things you should consider before you decide. And in one of them, I got on a little tangent, and it's like 2 pages of writing. And I realized, no, that's a sidebar. I'm either going to put it as a sidebar in this chapter with a little block, or it's going to be its own little mini thing. Because I realized I'm going to bore the crap out of the person who's looking for A, and I went on to B for way too long, right? So part of my writing is letting myself just go, just like letting that turn off the inner editor and just go and go. I'm going to share what I want to share. And when I get to the end, go, yeah, that doesn't fit there. and I may throw that out, or I may use it. But the thing is what I'm finding is I threw out stuff from the 7 Ps of publishing success. I threw out stuff that I didn't use, and then working with bookstores and libraries, and I was going, oh, I think I can use that here. So it's never really gone.
Don't you just love how Mark always has the reader in mind when he writes, as if he or she was sitting opposite him, or several of them even, like in a classroom? And this might be the best question to end this interview on. What is the most important long-term strategy for an author?
I think one of the biggest long-term strategies is to compare yourself to yourself in the past rather than where anyone else is. I think the biggest challenge we all have is we try to compare ourselves to the people who are ahead of us and have been doing it longer than us. Like, so for example, in my ghost story writing, if I compare myself to Stephen King, I'm never, ever going to measure up. Ever. Never going to happen. However, I outsold him one day with print books in a Costco, where I was sitting in front of my books in a skid, and his skid was right beside, and he wasn't there, obviously, but it doesn't matter. I outsold him. Now, I can compare myself to him on that one day, and I feel pretty good about myself. But if I compare myself to where I was and what I was doing 2 years ago, 3 years ago, whatever, I think that's a much better long-term measure of success. So I think remembering that too, I'm remembering the very first short story I had published, and some of the mistakes I made, and some of the errors, and I cringe just to think about those days. But I go back and tell that young writer a few things about remembering, in 20 years, no one else is going to remember this but you, probably. Like, this is just this thing weighing on you. And I think we spend way too much time focusing on, oh my God, my dashboard today, as opposed to thinking about what that time could have been spent doing, learning something new, working on your craft, understanding the business, butt in chair, fingers on keyboard. That time would be way better spent being productive, because a lot of our income is going to be residual income. And I always liken it to, I'm making money when I sleep. Right, I don't have to actively be, and I have done this, and I still will do this when we can see people in person again, at a convention, with my table, with my books in front of me. When my books are available through all of the international global retailers, I'm collaborating with them to sell my books. So I may be running promos, or I may be setting up promos in advance, but my books are selling while I'm sleeping. So that means I can kind of set some things in motion for promotions, for sure, and the right metadata and all those things. But I can spend more time working on the next project so that I can continue to have material that's relevant for people who want to read more of my stuff.
This is the beauty of our business. We can work on the next project, but our backlist still makes us money. We can work on things that will be useful for others or that will entertain others, while our backlist continues to grow and continues to make us money. And I really love this perspective. Don't we all do this? Compare ourselves to people who have been in the industry for decades before us. Just compare yourself to yourself 1 or 2 or 5 years ago, and you will feel much better already because you will see how far you've come. And now my classical question. What's your favorite story and why?
I think I have to always go back to Peter Parker and Spider-Man and the story of how he learned the hard way that with great power comes great responsibility. And I'll say this for authors in your audience, is that we have never had more power than ever before in the history of publishing and writing. We have the ability to reach people and touch people around the world with the words that we put on paper, digital or otherwise. That's a huge responsibility. But I think take that responsibility seriously, because chances are, even if it hasn't been millions of readers, even if it's only been 1 or 2 or a dozen readers, your writing has reached people. So you have a responsibility to the readers who you have resonated with, to see if you can continue to produce content that is valuable to them and has meaning for them, because the stories that you share, the stories that you put out in the world, can continue to touch and resonate with people hundreds and thousands of years into the future. Just think about that wonderful power, that wonderful responsibility that you have. So when you're worrying about, oh my God, I didn't sell any books today, my dashboard is crickets. Don't think about that. Think about what it is you're doing and the power you hold as a writer. Maybe you're that Shakespeare that these poor teenagers are forced to have to read in high school or whatever, but you've made an impact that everyone understands with the characters that you've created. That's a huge thing. So that's one of the reasons why Peter Parker and Stan Lee's story of that Spider-Man resonate with me in a big way. Which people, I guess is important.
Yeah. I wanted to say people won't be able to see it, but you have this on your shirt.
I'm wearing my Spider-Man shirt right now, yeah.
What an amazing interview. Let's recap the most important points. So long-term thinking is really important. Raving fans could be found on any platform, not just Amazon. And people are proud to be readers of that particular platform. So don't scare them off with only talking about Amazon and only giving giveaways for Amazon and so on. Wide thinking is not only about platforms. It's about exploring every way your potential reader could find you. It's about being hybrid, for example, or exploring other media. Be open to all possibilities and all revenue streams. Exploit them not only as a book, but as audio, video, and there's so much more available to us right now as storytellers. And also, if one revenue stream goes away, you won't have to sweat it because it won't be a threat to your existence. Every single book has their own path. So think about what your book, this particular book, is best suited for. Take some time and focus on each retailer and learn about them. At the same time, thinking about consumers who read on these devices and apps. In terms of writing craft, we can make information interesting in nonfiction books if we incorporate stories. In a personal way, like the reader would sit in front of you. Use personal examples or examples from other authors or other people to make it more dynamic. You can structure your non-fiction work with bullets, spreadsheets, and lists. And don't be afraid to throw away stuff because it won't be wasted. You can reuse it, likely, with something else. In terms of long-term strategy, don't compare yourself to others. Resist the temptation to compare yourself to others who have been in the industry for decades or even more years than you have. Look back and compare yourself to yourself a couple of years ago to see how far you've come. We authors have great power, with which comes a great responsibility. And now, where can we find Mark and everything that he does online?
Everything you can find, all my social media links, etc., are at markleslie.ca.
Thank you so much. It was such an inspiring interview, especially for the beginning of this year.
Thank you so much, Diana. It was an honor and a pleasure.
And I hope you enjoyed this interview as much as I did. Don't forget to rate the show, subscribe to it if you enjoyed it. If you want to learn how to use the power of storytelling to find your tribe and change the world, head over to my website storyartist.me and download your free copy of the Storyteller's Blueprint ebook and video course. I see you next time.